Yeah, we sat down and we cried when we remembered Jerusalem. We were sick, Lord, near to dying. Oh.
Let's get knowledge, wisdom, understanding. We'll do our stand.
Shalom, shalom, family. Welcome to another Bible class, a Bible study. My name is Uziah Lewy. Giving all honor, glory, and praise to the Most High, King of the universe, for life, food, clothing, and shelter, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Thanking the Most High God for all of our lives and the lives of all of you. On this day, we're having a snowstorm here in New York City, but we still here bringing you this program. So thanking the Most High God once again for being able to still come forward and do what we do. All honor, glory, and praise due to his high and holy name. Praying that everyone who is sick, that you will recover, and those of you that have been sick, torah YAH for your recovery. Praying that the Creator be with all those who are downtrodden, the poor, the needy, the sick, the widow, the fatherless. The Most High God would hear your cries and your supplications. And also praying that the Most High God be with all of our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, especially those who are incarcerated unjustly, praying that Yah will continue to bless you. It's a good day. Any day above ground is a good day. So we're thankful to the Most High God for that. So today we will be taking your questions. Sorry for the tardy start, but we were actually ready way before 9 o'clock, but everything kind of got crossed up and convoluted, and I kind of forgot that the program was on. I sat down for a second, so yeah, we're here to take your questions. For anyone out there, just a little message to all out there that would like to help out. Next, the first week in February, first Sunday, we will be going out for our initiative and feeding the homeless. So we're trying to give away some coats for those of you who have lightly worn coats and would like to contribute. You could contribute by sending your lightly worn coats to 382 Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11231. If you would like to contribute, or you could just donate by using our different ways of donation and just pointing out that the donations are towards feeding the homeless and the destitute. So we'd like to thank all of you. Also, I believe we have some links if you would like to contribute, some links for Amazon that you could buy some toiletries and things of that nature. And as I got the message, due to inclement weather, NYC public schools buildings are closed on 126. School will be in session remotely only for K through 8. So that's for anybody out there that has kids in New York City. All right. It will only be remotely from K through 8. All right. So that's for everyone out there. So.
Well, that's not for, that's not for the charter schools yet.
That's New York City public schools, I said.
Yeah.
Public schools. So I guess they trying to keep the buses off the road and, less congestion. So. All right, so we're ready for your questions. Anyone has any questions, feel free to ask your questions now. And usually at the end of every month, the rabbi does a question and answer period. So now I'm just waiting for my job now to say that we don't have to come in tomorrow. Okay, let's see here. Shalom to Freyon Binyamin, Ikazi Binyamin, Na'arya Coles, Camabed Yisrael, forefathers, a chosen people. Shalom to all of you. So there you see the Amazon link. Just press that, and you could contribute to anything that's on the list. Any donation is appreciated. See here. Zipporah J. Levy, thank you for joining us.
Shalom to everyone. So I guess in the meantime, because again, this is a day for people to ask their questions. We don't have a topic slated for today. So any questions people may have on any subject, feel free to do so. In the meantime, yesterday, most congregations covered the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt. And in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus, it spoke about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It spoke about Passover. So although we will be doing an actual study on that when the time comes, for this year, Passover, well, the Feast of Unleavened Bread will begin April 1st, Wednesday, April 1st in the evening. So the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread will be Wednesday, April 1st to Thursday, April 2nd. So that's just to give people a update on that. And based on the teaching of Exodus chapter 12, just bear in mind, even though again, this is going to be a couple months from now, just bear in mind the preparation for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we read in Exodus chapter 12 about, well, and also in the beginning of Exodus chapter 13, about removing leavening from all of our houses for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, just something to keep in mind right now. Again, that was something that was covered in most congregations yesterday. So, therefore, even if people have questions on that, they may ask questions on that now, but we will have a more detailed study on Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread as we do every year when the time gets close. So somewhere mid-March, we'll probably do that. But just wanted to mention that just to keep that in mind for people as you're starting to bring things into your homes. The yeast, the baking powder, baking soda, and those things, just you might want to start minimizing it even from now. So that way, when the time comes, you'll be prepared and you don't have to do a big rush and a lot of throwing out of things. So, and it's also good that the portion, even though it does get covered in most congregations when Passover comes, but it is good that the portion of bowl, which contains Exodus chapter 12, actually takes place a few months before Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread actually takes place, and that's yearly. So it gets us in gear, gets our mind focused on that ahead of time. So people do have 2 months and change to prepare, but the portion yesterday just brought it to all of our minds to be ready for when that time comes.
Question here in line. Forefathers, a chosen people. Shalom, Mishpachah. This is a two-part question. As we seek greater understanding and alignment with the will of the Most High, how should we interpret 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4 and 7 through 8 kippahs? And furthermore, does Zechariah 6, 11 through 15 offer insight into whether crowns may represent a more appropriate symbol of honor and calling?
Okay, so read those.
1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4 and verses 7 to 8 about head coverings.
Okay.
So 1 Corinthians 11, verse 4, and then you skip down to verses 7 through 8.
So just, as we get into that, there is a discrepancy in terms of head coverings and who can and cannot and should not wear head coverings between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And usually, as we have in our Bible study and, we cover both testaments, we do definitely point out the discrepancies and the contradictions where they do occur. Also, as primary note for the Bible study itself, or for this Bible study, which is open for everyone, we do focus on the Word of God. And so anything God says, and God primarily, well, actually not primarily, God speaks in the Old Testament. So there, from there, the Word of God is always going to be our primary focus. So I just wanted to give that ahead. So you said 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Hold on.
1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, and then
Okay,
verses
11.
7 to 6. And then the next chapter is, furthermore, does Zechariah 6, 11 through 15 offer insight into whether crowns may represent a more appropriate symbol of honor and calling?
So I'm going to put it on the screen first, and then everything that was just mentioned, actually. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, which says, every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. And then it jumps down to 7 and 8. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. And then we're going to go to Zechariah chapter, actually, just to continue. This is where some of the traditions and especially many of the Christian churches come from in terms of head covering. Verse 9, neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. Now we're going to go to actually Zechariah chapter 6, verses 11. Let me change the translation first. So chapter 6, verse 11. Actually, let me just make sure. I'll start from 10. Actually, start from 9. And the word of Jehovah came to me, saying, take of them of the captivity, even of Heldai, of Tobiah, and of Jediah, that are come from Babylon, and come down the same day, and go into the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah. Yea, take silver and gold, and make crowns, and set the one upon the head of Josiah, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and speak to him, saying, thus says Jehovah of hosts, saying, behold, a man whose name is the shoot, and who shall shoot up out of his place, and build the temple of Jehovah. Even he shall build the temple of Jehovah, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his throne, and there shall be a priest before his throne, and the council of peace shall be between them both. And the crown shall be to Helam and to Tobiah and to Jediah and to Haim, the son of Zephaniah, as a memorial in the temple of Jehovah. And they that are far off shall come and build in the temple of Jehovah, and ye shall know that Jehovah of hosts hath sent me unto you. And it shall come to pass, if ye will diligently hearken to the voice of Jehovah your God. So going back to verse 9, which is the verse that we actually started from, and as we just mentioned just now, and we mentioned it every time we have a Bible study, that we mention the name of God in the appropriate places that they occur in the scripture. A majority of the Old Testament was written in the Hebrew language, and in our English translations, you'll see the words the Lord. In many of our English translations, you'll see the words the Lord. And when you see the L in capital or the entire word Lord in capital letters, generally in the Hebrew text, that's where you have the name of God. And for the protection of God's name, many of those English translations don't transfer God's name from the Hebrew to the English. But for the purposes of our reading, so we can get the understanding of the God they were speaking about and the God that is speaking in these verses of the Old Testament, we mention the name of God. We pronounce it as Yehovah for our Bible study. Many people pronounce the name of God as Yahweh. And the consonants of God's name in Hebrew are Yod, He, Waw, He, which corresponds to YHWH. In the in the English language, the Yod, He, Waw, He of the Hebrew corresponds to the YHWH in the English. So again, we pronounce it as Yehovah. Many people pronounce the name of God as Yahweh. So, and that's also important for us to understand, even for what we're reading here, and for what the discrepancy is in the book of Corinthians, where that statement by Paul was not a statement that God made. So there is discrepancies in terms of what Paul said in many of his writings and many of the letters that he wrote to different people. He wrote letters to different nations, different groups of people. And oftentimes when you read the letters that he wrote, that he may give the different people that he's writing to different perspectives on his thoughts or his interpretation of things during his time. But none of it from what we see and none of it from we read in any of the texts of the writings of Paul are the word of Jehovah God. So it's important for us to follow the instructions of Jehovah God that they were given as they were given to Moses, as they were given to the prophets that came after Moses, and also to the people that existed before Moses, such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who Jehovah God, the same God that created the heavens and the earth, spoke to, all of these people as we read all throughout the Old Testament. So now the book of Zechariah, this is during the time of the children of Israel returning to the land out of the Persian captivity. And during the first group that came out of the Persian captivity into Jerusalem and into the territory of Judah to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild the house of God, the high priest at that time was Joshua, or Yehoshua as he was say the name in the Hebrew language. And that's why it says in this vision that Zechariah is having is in terms of putting a crown upon the head of Joshua or on the head of Yehoshua. So now what we're going to do is go back to the book of Exodus, and in chapter 27, this is where you're going to read, it should be 27. Actually, it's 28. So in 28, you read about all of the articles of clothing that the high priest had to wear and that the priests, who are the sons of Aaron, had to wear. So we'll start in the first verse where it says, "And bring thou near unto thee Aaron thy brother and his sons with him from among the children of Israel, that they may minister unto me in the priest's office, even Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, Aaron's sons. And thou shalt make holy garments for Aaron thy brother, for splendor and for beauty. And thou shalt speak unto all that are wise-hearted, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to sanctify him. that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. And these are the garments which they shall make: a breastplate and an ephod and a robe and a tunic of checker work, a mitre and a girdle, and they shall make holy garments for Aaron thy brother and his sons, that they may minister unto me in the priest's office. And amongst those articles of clothing that was mentioned was the mitre, as it mentions in verse 4. And that word is coming from the word mitznafet. And the better translation of that word, as you see on the right-hand side, is turban. So that is something that the high priest had to wear. The high priest had to wear a turban. So that is the crown, or that is part of the crown. The crown is something that someone with a level of dignity and honor and also command will wear on their heads. So the priests, especially the high priest, had to wear a mitre, as we read there. And we're just going to scroll down to get more of a description of this. And actually, before that, in verse 36, it mentions, and thou shalt make a plate of pure gold and engrave upon it like the engravings of a signet, holy to Jehovah. And thou shalt put it on a thread of blue, and it shall be upon the mitre, upon the forefront of the mitre it shall be. And it shall be upon Aaron's forehead, and Aaron shall bear the iniquity committed in the holy things which the children of Israel shall hallow, even in all their holy gifts, and it shall be always upon his forehead, that they may be accepted before Jehovah. So on the high priest's head was the mitre or the turban, and he had this gold plate which went across his forehead, and this gold plate was attached to the turban itself that he was wearing upon his head. And also going down a little bit further, when it talks about, actually go back a little bit, because the priests themselves also, so verse 40, and for Aaron's sons thou shalt make tunics, and thou shalt make for them girdles and head ties, shalt thou make for them for splendor and for beauty. And the translation, or the word that's here that they translate as head tie, is actually a mikvah. And the entire, okay, there it is. A top hat or a silk hat, that's the translation they're given here, but it's actually just, a form of hat. So the priests themselves are now putting everything together. Because in Corinthians, it said, 1 Corinthians, Paul is saying in verse 4, for every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But however, what God said is that the priests, the high priest and the priests, had to have their head covered. They couldn't go into the house of God. They couldn't perform any of their duties unless they had their head covered. So this would include praying, prophesying, and any of the duties that they had. So this is a stark contradiction between what God said that the high priest and the priests should be doing versus what Paul is saying that men should be doing. So that's just to clarify that. I know that explanation was kind of long, but that's just to clarify that a little bit, that there is a contradiction. So there is nothing, so just to summarize everything, there is nothing wrong with a man covering his head when praying, prophesying. Prophesying just means to inspire people with the word of God, or being inspired by the word of God. So there's nothing wrong with anyone having their head covered at any time when they're praying or prophesying, when they're appearing before God in a house of worship, or any place where they're in their home praying. Again, just the example of the priests themselves, they have to have their head covered, so they wouldn't be dishonoring their head if they're doing something that God is commanding them to do. And when we read in Zechariah, that is just a vision that God has given to Zechariah. And when you see also the chapters in Zechariah before that, God is telling Zechariah that he will be clothing Joshua the high priest so therefore, during that time, during that generation, Joshua, who was out of the lineage of Aaron, was installed as a high priest, and he was wearing the high priest garments during that generation.
The arguments that people offer for that, some Christians and some Messianic Israelites, is that, oh, that was just talking about the priests. What would you say about that? The priests work by different rules. They were able to kindle fire. They were able to do offerings on the Shabbat. They work by different rules. What would be your answer for that?
So the priests do operate by a different set of rules than anybody else, but the priests also could not break any of the commands of God. So if there was a command that was generally said that men could not have their head covered, then the priests wouldn't be able to cover their heads. Priests were just allowed to do things such as you mentioned, the offerings, and they had to protect their office of the priesthood by making sure that no one else did any offerings beside them. But the priests couldn't break the Sabbath day. They couldn't profane the Sabbath day. The offerings or the sacrifices that the priests were doing were not considered work. Because also people use that analogy, not just for the head covering, but for many things. People use that analogy and say, well, the priests did certain quote unquote work on the Sabbath day, but yet we're not supposed to work. What the priests were doing was not considered work in terms of the statutes of the Sabbath day. But even along with that, the priests could not actually work on the Sabbath day. They couldn't, any of the stuff that the people were not supposed to do, the priests were not supposed to do when it comes to, they couldn't cook. The fire was already lit on the altar, because we read earlier actually later in the book of Leviticus, that the fire on the altar had to be kept burning at all times. So it wasn't a situation where the priests were kindling fire on the Sabbath day, but the fire on the altar was continually on. So that covers that.
They were doing the most they were doing was probably flaying.
Slaying the animal,
and then
cutting the animal up, and putting the pieces on the altar. And they were actually less, except for when the Sabbath day came in conjunction with some of the holy days, there were actually less offerings, and just in comparison, because they would have the daily burnt offering that they would do twice a day for the Sabbath day, and then they had an additional Sabbath offering. When you read about the holy days, there are actually other offerings that are performed beyond the daily burnt offerings,
right,
in abundance. So the Sabbath day, even though the priests had to do some offering, unless it came in conjunction with a holy day, it was actually kind of less than the other days. So just in regards to that, the priests were not allowed to do anything, especially they would not be allowed to profane themselves in a manner that God would say that other people would be profaning themselves. So if head coverings was something that profanes people, or profanes men, just to be specific, then the priest wouldn't be allowed to do that. So that wasn't something that head coverings was something that was just specific for the priests as opposed to everybody else.
That's interesting when we speak about the priest and the Shabbat day and what they are allowed to do and what they aren't doing. Because like you said, those pieces, slaying the animal, these are the daily offerings, right? Part of the daily offerings. And not only that, but even during the time of 7-day feast or festivals, there was also an additional offering for those days, etc. And then that brings me back to the point of how a lot of the Europeans, they talk about what is a burden and bearing a burden on the Shabbat. They took the actual meaning of bearing a burden, and I think they went kind of extreme with it in terms of carrying a book, things of that manner. I think the different arguments. You can't carry a book in your house. You can't, do certain things. I know that they have midrash on these topics. But what's your opinion on that? Bearing a burden, and what is a burden on the Shabbat day, and what exactly is the book talking about when it talks about bearing a burden?
So for the burdens, and that's in Jeremiah chapter, the first place it appears is Jeremiah chapter 17. And we'll briefly go there because there's most likely some questions out there, and this is question and answer day. Should be Jeremiah chapter 17. Right, so we'll start from 19. And thus said Jehovah unto me, go and stand at the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah come in, and by which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say unto them, hear ye the word of Jehovah, ye kings of Judah, and all Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus says Jehovah, take heed for the sake of your souls, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem, neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day as I commanded your fathers. First, we'll look up the word. And this is, the context is going to be there. We don't necessarily have to go specifically into the Hebrew for this one. But the word that is translated as burden is the word masa, which is load bearing, tribute burden, lifting. And that's the literal translation of that word. So it's not incorrect to translate the word as burden here. And then we're going to go a little bit. We'll just read the last verse in the chapter. But if you will not hearken unto me to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden, and enter in at the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then will I kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the places of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. So the children of Israel, especially those living in the territory of Judah, because the northern kingdom was already taken into captivity, were told that they were not supposed to leave their houses with any burdens. They were not supposed to enter into Jerusalem with any burdens. So this is something that they would be carrying out of their houses and carrying into Jerusalem. To get a better context of that, we're going to go to the book of Nehemiah. And it's in the last chapter. So we'll start from verse 14. So Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 14. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for the wars thereof. In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in heaps of corn, and laden asses therewith, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I forewarned them in the day wherein they sold their victuals. So this verse here gives us the actual context of what the burden is. So the burden is the treading of the winepress, the heaping of the corn, the lading of the asses, the carrying the wine, the grapes and figs. And then it says, and all manner of burdens. So these are just examples. These are not the only forms of burden, but it says these things and all manner of burdens. And the idea is that they were selling these victuals. So the burden that was mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 17, in conjunction with what we read here in Nehemiah chapter 13, are the items that people would be carrying to sell. So we're not allowed to leave our homes with any items to sell on the Sabbath day or even after the Sabbath day. As it continues here, there dwelt men by Tyre also therein, who brought in fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said unto them, what evil thing is this that you do, and profane the Sabbath day? So they profaned the Sabbath day by selling items or selling these burdens that they were carrying on the Sabbath day. And then he forewarned them, he's forewarned the children of Israel. This is where the doors of Jerusalem were shut, so that no burdens would be brought in to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And there were people that were just waiting by the gates of Jerusalem to sell their burdens after the Sabbath day. And then Nehemiah even contended with them and told them, don't dwell by the gate, even if they're not selling on the Sabbath day, don't dwell by the gate with your burdens. And then in verse 22, and I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath, Remember unto me, oh my God, this also must spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. So just the context from what we read in Jeremiah chapter 17 and Nehemiah chapter 13 is that the burdens are the actual wares, the actual victuals, as it mentioned, that people would be carrying to sell. So it's not about the weight of the items, it's not about the size of the items that people may carry out of their homes. It doesn't mean that you should be carrying heavy things out of your house either. But the context of Jeremiah 17 and Nehemiah 13 is that the burdens are things that people are carrying out of their homes to sell.
Thank you. We do have some questions here. First one, let me just, from Naarya Coles. Who was Jeremiah speaking about to the children of Binyamin to tell them to prepare for battle in Jerusalem?
We need a chapter and verse for that one.
Yeah, we need a chapter and verse. Let me see. Question, question. Isaiah 9:6. Who is this child? Christianity states it's JC, which is not true. So
So
they want to know Isaiah 9:6.
The context of Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, which is in the King James Version 9, verse 5. No, it's 9:6 in the King James and 9:5 in the Holy Scriptures. Yeah, because here it is. So here we have Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5. And again, that's chapter 6. Sorry, that's verse 6 in the King James Version, where it says, "For a child is born unto us, a son is given unto us, and the government is upon his shoulder, and his name is called Pele Yoez El Gibor Abiad Sar Shalom. That the government may be increased, and of peace there be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it through justice and through righteousness from henceforth even forever. The zeal of Jehovah of hosts does perform this." So we'll continue reading. "The Lord sent a word into Jacob, and it have lighted upon Israel, and all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, that say in pride and arrogancy of heart, the bricks are fallen, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but cedars will be put in their place. Therefore Jehovah does set up upon high the adversaries of Rezin against him, and spur his enemies, the Arameans on the east and the Philistines on the west, and they devour Israel with open mouth. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still." So all of this that was read after helps us to get the context. Also, reading from actually Isaiah chapter 7 up until this point lets us know a lot of things. So this child, in most interpretations, is just strictly focusing on the Holy Scriptures or the Old Testament, is that this child is Hezekiah, who was king, who was the son of Ahaz, who was the current king of Judah, when you read everything in context from Isaiah chapter 7, even up until this point. So in Hezekiah's time, he had peace during his time, or during his reign of being the king of Judah, but also during his reign, the northern kingdom of Israel, also known as Ephraim, went into captivity by the Assyrians. So that's why I mentioned Rezin later on, and the Arameans and everybody else that would be that the Assyrians will also devour and take into captivity along with the northern kingdom. So there were a lot of things. There was civil war happening amongst the children of Israel, and there were wars happening around the children of Israel, with Assyria coming into power. Right before this, the Philistines were, of course, always giving the children of Israel trouble. Then you had the Arameans, which is modern-day Syria, were giving the northern kingdom of Israel trouble initially, but then after a point in time, the Arameans joined with the northern kingdom of Israel to fight against the southern kingdom which is the kingdom Judah. And God raised up Assyria to be the kingdom that would take the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity along with the Arameans. So that's why everything in context matters. So this child, and of course, as it says here, it says, for a child is born into us. So this child was born during this time that Isaiah the prophet is living in and speaking about. And this is during the time of King Ahaz. So when it says for a child is born into us, this is not future tense. This is past tense, because the child, of course, is already born at this point. And it says a son is given unto us. So the son is already, this son is already alive. And it said the government is upon his shoulder. So Ahaz is the current king of Judah, but it says that the government is upon his shoulder. So there's going to be someone that's going to have rulership of the southern kingdom of Judah after Ahaz. So that's Hezekiah. And it says, and his name is called Pele Yoez El Gibor Abi Ad Sar Shalom. That's where most translations have it as. However, the exact translation, just going from, and this is where one of those verses where the Hebrew translation or interpretation is necessary, because it says here, Wayikra, which is, and he will call, not, and he is called or he was called. Wayikra, when you go to the book of Leviticus, and in Hebrew, that book is called Wayikra. The first few words of that book is, and he called. So Wayikra means, and he called. Yikra is the word for he will call. Then the Wayikra is, and he will call. So, and he will call Shema, which is his name. So you have Pele Yoetz, and this is going to be kind of quick at this point. Pele, which is wonderful. Yoetz is where you get counsel, so wonderful counselor. El, which is God. And Gibor, which is mighty. So, and he will call his name the mighty counselor, the mighty God, Avi Ad, which is everlasting Father, Sar Shalom. So the one that is calling this child, so the child's name is actually going to be referenced as Sar Shalom, or the Prince of Peace, which is Hezekiah. The one that is doing the calling of this child's name is the wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, which we know is the God of the universe. So Jehovah God is calling this child Sar Shalom, or Jehovah God is calling this child the Prince of Peace. There's many translations and misunderstandings that this entire phrase of Pele Yoetz El Gibor Avi Ad Sar Shalom is attributed to this child. However, when you read it exactly as it's stated in the Hebrew, that it's not that this child will be called this, it's that you have the everlasting Father, the mighty God, the mighty counselor, who is Jehovah God, is calling this child's name, or calling this child, not calling this child's name the Prince of Peace. So that's an attribute that is going to be given to this child. And again, by interpretation, this is King Hezekiah, who was the king that reigned after his father, King Ahaz. That was kind of a quick, brief explanation of that, just to get everything in context. But that interpretation is the best interpretation of what's taking place, especially being that this child was already born during this time that Isaiah is speaking. That these questions are good questions. When we have these Bible studies, and I apologize because I did mute myself after I was already speaking, but
Right.
I was basically just saying that these are good questions, and when we have our Bible study with question and answer days, that it appears, as we have today, some of the questions coming up in regards to the discrepancies between the Old and the New Testament. And, that's what these question and answer days hopefully help, decipher some of these issues or some of the discrepancies that people have. So in regards to the Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, hopefully that question, or Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5 in the Tanakh, or the Holy Scriptures, hopefully that question was answered. I don't believe I was on mute during that explanation, so hopefully I wasn't. But hopefully that explanation was good enough.
No, you weren't on mute. I seen the explanation. I heard it and it was coming out. I think I just dozed off for a second. Let me see. Isaiah. Question: Is Jacob of the Old Testament the same Jacob of the New Testament? It's many Jacobs. I think you got to pinpoint what chapter, what verse.
But just for a brief answer, it wouldn't be, because Jacob in the Old Testament, who was the grandson of Abraham, passed away at the end of the book of Genesis. Now, there are going to be other books in the Bible that would refer to Jacob, who was the grandson of Abraham. But as Chief was going to mention, there would be other people that could have the name Jacob, but it wouldn't be if the narrative is speaking about someone named Jacob during that time, then it would be a different Jacob,
Right.
because the Jacob that existed in Genesis passed away, or his death is recorded in the end of the book of Genesis.
The only Jacob that will be the same Jacob if you're talking genealogy. When they start running off the genealogy in the New Testament, then and it speaks about Jacob, then that'll be, of course, the Jacob that they because they trying to do a genealogy. So when they run down the genealogy, but like the rabbi said, if they speaking of a person that's living during the New Testament times, it would not be Jacob of the Old Testament. I don't see any more questions here. Let's see. Yeah, get your questions out. Get your questions out. Get your questions out.
For what I see, reference to, and we'll do Jeremiah chapter 6. Yeah, that should be our next Bible
Right.
study. Not that that's coming up, but where it says, that's probably the battle that was in question earlier. Put yourselves, let me go back to 6:1. Put yourselves under the covert, you children of Binyamin, away from the midst of Jerusalem, and blow the horn of Tekoa, and set up a signal on Beit Karim, for evil looketh from the north, and a great destruction. God is warning the children of Binyamin, as well as the children of Judah, or these two tribes in particular, about Babylon, who is coming from the north, bringing destruction into the land. Assyria had already taken the northern kingdom into captivity. So those 10, or what is known as the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, were already taken away. So you have 2 tribes left in the southern kingdom. So God is speaking to Judah and Binyamin, telling them to be ready of the destruction in this war that is going to be coming from the north, which is Babylon, or the destruction coming from the north, which is Babylon.
It was Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 6. He did put it up there. Please let us get your questions. We actually got about 10 more minutes left. So don't forget, for all of you who are out there that would like to contribute to our coat drive and feeding the homeless, the first weekend in February, the first Sunday in February, which I believe is either the 6th or the 5th. Please
Actually, it's taking place on the 8th, so that's the second Sunday actually in February.
The second Sunday in February, the 8th.
For this, yeah.
Okay, the second Sunday in February, we'll be giving out coats to the homeless. New York City is actually very cold. It's been very cold this winter. So there are a lot of families out there in need of coats, a lot of people, men and women, in need of coats. So send your lightly worn coats that you don't fit anymore, you don't use anymore. Send it. You could send it to 382 Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11231. Or you could just donate to us. There was a link that our admin, Sister Kanzi, put up there earlier. Amazon list or registry to where you could donate toiletries and all sorts of things. And if you would like to just donate cash to us, so that we could take care of those things, you could donate to any one of these QR codes right here. But make sure that you put on it towards the feeding the homeless and looking out for the poor and the needy. All right, make a distinction, because or else it would just go into our regular donation. I mean, and despite of everything, the donations also go and help out for the poor and the needy. So, but just make a note so that we can know exactly what is it that we're collecting for that outreach. So also you will know that this is the way to donate to us if you would like to make any donations to us towards a congregation, and we appreciate you. I don't think we have any more questions, Rabbi. So things they don't discuss in church didn't come on today. He would have a bunch of questions, but he's not on today. I think everybody's out shoveling their snow or trying to find a way. If you are in the New York City area or somewhere in the East Coast, it's a lot of shoveling snow that's going to be happening. So let me see if I could give y'all a view of what's going on out here. Give me a second here. Oh. So that you can see what's going on. You can see the snow out here. It's accumulating and it's coming down. So I'm not sure if you can see that. Oh, it seemed like the camera went out. Hold on, let me see something here.
No, you have your background. That's what happened.
Oh, the background. That's what it. Hold on, let me remove the background. Real live stuff going on. Let me see. Blur background. All right, here we go. That's for everyone out there. So it's real. Just started this morning. So yeah, that's for everyone out there. Just started this morning. So yeah, that's what we're dealing with at this moment. So you see all the information up there is up there. So the admin is putting it up. I know myself and the rabbi got to go out and do some work in our sidewalk. So if we have no more questions, somebody said we can have all that. I know. We thank the Most High God for allowing us to be here today, and pray that the Creator of heaven and earth will continue to bless and keep each and every one of you. As I say these words, I pray that the Most High God will bless and keep each and every one of us and our endeavors, that He will continue to watch and protect us. Praying that the Most High God will bless us all. Yivareka Yehovah Yishmareka. Ya'ir Yehovah Panawaleka Wikuneka. Yisai Yehovah Panawaleka Weasem Laka Shalom. May Yehovah bless thee and keep thee. May Yehovah make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May Yehovah lift up his countenance upon thee and may he grant thee peace. Amen. May the Most High God continue to bless us all. Shalom, shalom, and everyone have a great day. Hallelujah.
Let's get knowledge, wisdom, understanding. We'll do our standing. All praises to the Most High, His laws and commandments. The hot CHOKMAH BINAH here to push it through your speakers. Judgment, truth, and love should be coming from the leaders. Yeah, knowledge, wisdom, understanding. We'll do our standing. All praises to the Most High, His laws and commandments. The hot CHOKMAH BINAH here to push it through your speakers. Judgment, truth, and love should be coming from the